Theodore Campbell's weathered hand froze on his walking stick, the desperate roar echoing through the Oregon forest, cutting his morning routine dead. The sound wasn't right. Not the territorial bellow of a dominant bear, but something far more terrifying. A mother's death cry. 50 yards ahead, coiled around a massive black bear like a living nightmare, stretched 12 feet of Burmese python, thick as a telephone pole, muscles rippling with crushing force. The bear's cubs screamed from a nearby pine, their high-pitched wails piercing the morning air as they watched their mother slowly suffocate in the serpent's deadly embrace. Ted's arthritic fingers trembled against the carved handle. At 80 years old, with a bad heart and creaking joints, he should walk away. Any sane person would call the rangers and retreat to safety. But those cubs' cries reminded him of sounds he'd tried 60 years to forget. "Martha always said I was too stubborn to mind my own business," he whispered to himself, stepping toward certain death. What happened next would uncover a secret that had been buried in these woods for over 6 decades. Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments along with the city you're watching from now. Let's continue with the story. Theodore Ted Campbell had walked these same forest trails every morning for 15 years, ever since Martha's funeral. The rhythm of boots on pine needles and the steady tap of his walking stick had become his meditation, his escape from the silence of an empty house where her coffee cup still sat unwashed in the sink. At 80, Ted carried the lean frame of a man who'd worked with his hands his entire life. First as a mechanic in the Army during Korea, then 37 years fixing engines at Henderson's garage in Pine Valley. His shoulders bore the permanent stoop of someone who'd spent decades hunched over carburetors and transmissions, but his gray eyes remained sharp, alert to every sound in the woods he'd come to know like scripture. The cabin where he lived alone sat on 40 acres of inherited land bordered by Cascade National Forest. His Social Security check of $1,847 barely covered the basics, but Ted had never needed much. Martha used to joke that he was half hermit anyway, preferring the company of trees to people. She'd been wrong about that. He preferred the company of memories. This morning felt different, though. October 15th always did. 61 years ago today, everything had changed. Eleanor Hayes, the banker's daughter with corn silk hair and a laugh that could make angels weep, had supposedly run off with her father's business partner while Ted was serving overseas. At least, that's what his best friend Bobby Mitchell had told him in a letter that arrived 3 weeks after Ted shipped home. Ted had spent the next 4 decades trying to forget her, eventually succeeding enough to fall in love with Martha, a kind schoolteacher who never asked about the sadness that sometimes clouded his features on October nights. They'd had 38 good years together before the cancer took her, and not once had he mentioned Eleanor's name aloud. But he thought about her. Lord help him, especially on mornings like this when the autumn light filtered through the Douglas firs exactly the way it had that last day before he'd left for Korea. She'd kissed him goodbye at the train station, pressed something into his palm, a small velvet box he'd been too nervous to open until he was halfway to basic training. Inside had been a simple gold band with an inscription, "Until the stars burn out, E.H." He still wore it on a chain around his neck, hidden beneath his flannel shirts like a guilty secret. The forest had always been his confessional, the one place where he could talk to Martha's memory, to God, even sometimes to the ghost of a girl who'd broken his heart 6 decades ago. Today the trees seemed to be listening with unusual intensity, as if they knew something he didn't. That's when the roaring started. Desperate, primal, wrong. Ted quickened his pace, arthritis forgotten, moving toward a sound that would change everything he thought he knew about love, loyalty, and the mysterious ways the universe settles old debts. The scene that greeted Ted through the Douglas fir thicket defied everything he thought he knew about the natural world. A massive Burmese python, easily 12 feet long and thick as a man's torso, had wrapped itself around a female black bear in a death spiral that seemed to belong in some nightmare documentary about the Amazon, not the peaceful forests of Oregon. The bear, a beautiful specimen, probably 6 years old and weighing close to 250 pounds, was losing the battle. Her powerful limbs thrashed weakly as the constrictor's coils tightened around her ribcage with each labored breath. Foam flecked her muzzle, and her dark eyes rolled wildly, seeking escape that wouldn't come. Above them, clinging to the rough bark of a towering pine, 2 cubs no bigger than house cats wailed in terror. Their high-pitched cries cut through Ted like rusty knife blades, transporting him instantly to Korea, to the sounds of children caught in artillery fire, helpless and abandoned. "Jesus Christ," Ted whispered, his hand instinctively tightening on his walking stick. The carved oak cane had been Martha's last gift to him, fitted with a steel tip for stability on icy winter walks. Now it felt like the only weapon between those cubs and orphanhood. Every rational part of his 80-year-old brain screamed at him to back away. Call the Forest Service on his cell phone, if he could even get a signal out here. Wait for professionals with tranquilizer guns and proper equipment. At his age, with his heart condition and arthritic joints, intervening would be suicide. But the cubs' cries grew more desperate, and the mother bear's struggles were weakening. In minutes, maybe less, those babies would watch their mother die. Something deep in Ted's chest, something that had been dormant since Martha's passing, roared to life. "Like hell," he muttered, and stepped into the clearing. The python's head swiveled toward him with alien intelligence, black eyes measuring this new threat. The serpent was magnificent and terrifying, its diamond-patterned scales catching the morning light like armor. This wasn't a native species. Burmese pythons belonged in the Florida Everglades, not Oregon forests. Someone had either released or lost an exotic pet that had somehow survived and grown to monstrous proportions. Ted raised his walking stick and brought it down hard across the snake's skull. The impact sent shock waves up his arm, but the python barely flinched. If anything, its coils tightened around the bear, whose breathing became even more labored. "Come on, you bastard!" Ted wheezed, circling for another angle. His heart hammered against his ribs like a caged bird, but he couldn't stop now. Those cubs needed their mother, and Martha had always said he was too stubborn to quit when something mattered. The next blow caught the python just behind the head, and this time it responded. The massive tail whipped around, catching Ted across the shins and sending him sprawling into the pine needles. Pain exploded through his left knee, but he rolled away as the snake's head struck where he'd been lying just seconds before. Fighting from the ground, Ted jabbed upward with the steel tip of his cane, catching the python in the soft tissue under its jaw. The snake recoiled with a hiss that sounded like steam escaping from a radiator, finally loosening its grip on the bear enough for her to draw a full breath. For 15 minutes, that felt like hours, the battle continued. Ted's Korean War training kicked in. Stay mobile, strike and retreat, use your brain when your body fails you. The python was stronger, but Ted was desperate and experienced in the kind of life-or-death combat most people only saw in movies. When the snake finally decided this fight wasn't worth the effort and began to slither away into the underbrush, Ted collapsed beside the semi-conscious bear, his chest heaving and sweat stinging his eyes despite the cool October morning. The mother bear lay on her side, breathing heavily but alive. Her thick fur had protected her from the worst of the python's crushing force, though Ted could see bruising around her rib cage and a few minor cuts where the snake's teeth had found purchase. "Easy there, Mama," Ted whispered, reaching into his jacket pocket for the small first aid kit he always carried on his walks. Martha had insisted on it after his first heart attack 5 years ago. "You're going to be okay. Your babies need you." As if responding to his words, the bear's dark eyes focused on his face. For a moment that seemed to stretch beyond time, they looked at each other, two creatures who understood what it meant to fight for something more important than your own survival. The cubs had climbed down from their tree and now huddled nearby, torn between approaching their mother and maintaining their distance from the strange human who had somehow saved her life. Ted had no idea that this moment of connection would lead him to a truth that had been buried in these woods for over 60 years. For 6 hours, Ted sat vigil beside the injured bear, watching her slow recovery with the patience of a man who'd learned that healing couldn't be rushed. The cubs had gradually crept closer, emboldened by their mother's calm acceptance of this strange, gentle human who smelled of motor oil and loneliness. "You know, I never told Martha about Eleanor," Ted found himself whispering to the bear as she dozed in the dappled sunlight. 38 years of marriage, and I kept that secret locked up tight as a mason jar. Figured it wasn't fair to burden her with my old heartbreak." The bear's ear twitched at the sound of his voice, though her eyes remained closed. One of the cubs, a little female with a distinctive white patch on her chest, had ventured close enough to sniff Ted's boot, her wet nose leaving a damp spot on the worn leather. "Eleanor Hayes," he continued, surprising himself with how easily her name came after decades of silence. "Prettiest girl in Pine Valley and smart as a whip. Her daddy owned the bank, had plans for her to marry some college boy from Portland with money and prospects. Instead, she fell for a grease monkey's son who could barely afford a hamburger at Miller's Diner." The memory hit him like a physical blow. Eleanor in her blue dress sharing a chocolate malt with 2 straws because he'd spent his last 50 cents on gas for his borrowed car. She'd laughed when he apologized, said she'd rather split a shake with him than eat caviar with anyone else. "I was going to marry her when I got back from Korea." Ted's voice cracked slightly. "Had it all planned out. Figured I'd use my army pay to buy a little garage, maybe start a family. She promised to wait." The mother bear stirred, lifting her massive head to look directly at Ted. Her dark eyes held an intelligence that seemed almost human, as if she understood the weight of his confession. Slowly, deliberately, she rose to her feet, testing her strength. The cubs immediately scampered to her side, but instead of leading them away, she did something that stopped Ted's heart. She walked directly to him and gently grasped the sleeve of his flannel shirt between her teeth. "What are you doing, girl?" Ted asked, but the bear was already tugging insistently, pulling him toward a barely visible trail that led deeper into the forest. When he didn't immediately follow, she released his sleeve and took several steps down the path, then turned back to look at him with unmistakable intention. "You want me to follow you?" The absurdity of the situation wasn't lost on Ted. Here he was, an 80-year-old man with a bad heart, being invited on a hike by a wild bear. Martha would have declared him certifiably insane, but something in the bear's manner suggested urgency, purpose. And Ted had learned long ago that when life offered you a mystery, you either embraced it or spent the rest of your days wondering what you'd missed. The journey took nearly 2 hours. The bear moved with surprising consideration for Ted's limitations, pausing whenever his breathing became labored, waiting patiently while he rested against tree trunks and checked his pocket compass. The trail was ancient, probably carved by generations of wildlife moving between water sources and feeding grounds. "Lord have mercy," Ted muttered as his arthritic knees protested another steep incline. "If this is how I die, Martha's going to be waiting at the pearly gates with an 'I told you so' and a rolling pin." But the bear seemed to sense his distress, deliberately choosing easier paths when possible, even nudging fallen branches out of his way with her powerful shoulders. The cubs followed behind, occasionally tumbling over each other in their eagerness to keep up, providing the only moments of levity in an increasingly surreal afternoon. As they descended into a hidden ravine Ted had never seen, despite 15 years of walking these woods, the quality of light changed. Here, massive old-growth trees created a cathedral canopy that filtered the sunlight into ethereal beams. The air felt different too, hushed, expectant, as if they were approaching something sacred. That's when Ted saw it. Nestled among towering Douglas firs and nearly consumed by 6 decades of undergrowth, the twisted remains of a small aircraft lay like a sleeping giant. The fuselage was intact but crumpled, the wings sheared off and scattered among the ferns. Rust and moss had claimed most of the metal surfaces, but Ted could still make out partial registration numbers on what remained of the tail. N7839E. His legs nearly buckled as recognition hit him like a physical blow. He'd seen those numbers before, painted on the side of a pristine Cessna 180 parked at Pine Valley's tiny airstrip. Harold Hayes, Eleanor's father, had been proud of that plane, one of only 3 private aircraft in the county. "Jesus, Mary, and Joseph," Ted whispered, sinking to his knees in the soft earth. "Eleanor." The bear approached him slowly, her cubs flanking her like honor guards. She sat down beside Ted, close enough that he could feel the warmth radiating from her massive frame, and simply waited. It was as if she understood that this moment required reverence, that whatever secrets lay within that broken aircraft had been waiting 61 years for the right person to find them. Ted's hands shook as he reached for his cell phone, though he wasn't surprised to find no signal in this deep ravine. Whatever lay ahead, he would face it alone, guided only by a bear who had somehow known exactly where to bring him. The October light was beginning to fade, casting long shadows through the ancient trees, but Ted felt more awake, more alive than he had since Martha's funeral. Something important was about to be revealed, something that might finally answer the questions that had haunted him for over 6 decades. The bear nudged his shoulder gently, encouraging him forward. Together they approached the wreckage of dreams and the possibility of truth. The aircraft's cabin door hung askew on corroded hinges, revealing an interior that time had claimed but not completely destroyed. Ted's flashlight beam, weak but steady from the small LED light he kept on his keychain, swept across seats that had once held living, breathing people with hopes and dreams and destinations. The pilot's seat still contained skeletal remains, held in place by a seatbelt that had somehow survived 6 decades of weather and decay. A tarnished wedding ring clung to a finger bone, and Ted felt a stab of sympathy for another soul who'd never made it home to someone who loved him. The nameplate on the instrument panel read, "John Morrison, Private Pilot License number 7439. But it was the passenger area that stopped Ted's breath entirely. A metal lockbox, somehow shielded from the worst of the elements by the aircraft's twisted frame, sat wedged between 2 seats. Despite the rust along its edges, the military-style container appeared remarkably intact. Ted's hands trembled as he worked to free it from the debris, his heart hammering against his ribs like a caged sparrow. The bear watched from the cabin doorway, her massive frame blocking most of the fading daylight. Her cubs had curled up nearby, apparently content to wait while this strange ritual played out. There was something almost ceremonial about their presence, as if they understood they were witnessing something sacred. The lockbox's combination dial had long since seized, but the latch mechanism yielded to pressure from Ted's pocket knife. Inside, wrapped in what had once been oiled cloth, lay a collection that made Ted's knees buckle completely. 47 letters, each addressed in feminine handwriting to Theodore Campbell, COOUS, Army, APO San Francisco. The return address on every envelope read, Eleanor Hayes, 1247 Maple Street, Pine Valley, Oregon. Ted's vision blurred as he lifted the first letter with shaking fingers. The postmark read, September 10th, 1963. 3 months after he'd shipped out for Korea, 2 months before the date on Bobby Mitchell's letter telling him Eleanor had run off with another man. With reverent care, he opened the envelope and began to read by the weak light of his flashlight. My dearest Ted, I don't know if you're getting these letters. I've sent 12 now and haven't heard back from any of them. Bobby says the mail service to Korea is unreliable, that lots of letters never make it through. He also said something that's been eating at my heart like acid. That you married a girl from your unit, someone named Kim who helped with translations. I can't believe it, Ted. I won't believe it. The boy who promised to love me until the stars burn out wouldn't break that promise without so much as a goodbye. If you did marry her, if you found someone else, then please just write me one letter telling me so. The not knowing is killing me slowly. I'm working at Daddy's bank now, saving every penny. If you still want me, if there's been some terrible mistake, I'll find a way to come to you. I don't care if I have to scrub floors in Seoul or wash dishes in Tokyo. I'll come. Forever yours. I hope. Eleanor Ted's chest felt like someone had parked a truck on it. With fumbling fingers, he opened the next letter, dated September 25th. My darling Ted, still no word from you, but I refuse to give up hope. Mrs. Patterson at the post office says sometimes letters get held up for months before being delivered to overseas units. I'm choosing to believe that's what's happening. Something wonderful has happened. I've been accepted into the Army Nurse Corps. I know Daddy's furious. He's threatened to cut off my allowance and disinherit me, but I don't care about his money. If you're really married to someone else, I can at least serve my country and help other boys like you come home safely. But if there's been a mistake, if you're still the man who carved our initials in the oak tree behind Miller's Diner, then maybe I can find you. They're sending nurses to Vietnam now, to the field hospitals. I've volunteered. Daddy thinks I've lost my mind, but I think I've finally found my purpose. Wait for me, Ted. If you ever loved me, wait for me. Eleanor. The letters continued, each one a dagger to Ted's heart. Eleanor's handwriting grew more desperate as the months passed, her faith in their love warring with the silence from Korea and Bobby's increasingly insistent reports that Ted had moved on. October 1st, 1963. Ted, I leave for Vietnam in 2 weeks. Daddy's finally stopped fighting me on it. I think he's realized that his stubborn daughter inherited her determination from him. He's even offered to fly me to the West Coast in his plane to catch the military transport. I know this is crazy. I know a smart girl would accept that silence means goodbye. But I can't, Ted. I dream about you every night, and in those dreams you're calling my name, asking why I didn't come. If I die in Vietnam, at least I'll die trying to find you. All my love, Eleanor. October 12th, 1963. My dearest Ted, we fly out tomorrow morning. Daddy's pilot, John Morrison, will take us to San Francisco, where I'll catch the transport to Saigon. John's a good man, flew bombers in World War II, and Daddy trusts him completely. I'm scared, but not of dying. I'm scared that I'll get there and find out Bobby was right, that you really have forgotten me. But I'd rather know the truth than spend my life wondering. I'm bringing something with me, something I've been saving since the day you left. If we find each other again, it will make sense. If we don't, well, at least I'll have tried. Forever yours, Eleanor. The final letter was different from the others. The handwriting was shaky, penciled quickly on paper that had been damaged by water. The words were smeared in places, and Ted realized with horror that some of the stains might be blood. October 15th, 1963. Ted, if anyone ever finds this, I need them to know the truth. I loved Theodore Campbell with every breath in my body. He never got my letters. I know that now. Someone lied to both of us, but I don't know who or why. The plane is going down. John thinks we hit a downdraft or something's wrong with the engine. We're trying to make an emergency landing somewhere in the Oregon wilderness. I'm not afraid of dying, only of dying without telling you that I never stopped loving you. I saved a little black bear cub this morning when we landed to check the plane. She was caught in a trap, crying for her mother. John said we were crazy to stop, but I couldn't leave her there. Maybe that was God's way of giving me one last chance to do something good. Look for the ring, Ted. I hid it in my jewelry box back home. It was supposed to be our engagement ring. I bought it with my own money from working at the bank. The inscription says everything I never got to tell you. I love you. I've always loved you. I'll love you until the stars burn out, just like we promised. Eleanor Ted's sobs echoed through the silent forest as 61 years of carefully constructed lies crumbled around him. Eleanor hadn't abandoned him. She'd died trying to reach him, believing he'd forgotten her, never knowing that he'd spent 6 decades cursing her name for a betrayal that had never happened. The bear moved closer, her warm bulk a comforting presence as Ted fell apart completely. Somewhere in the gathering darkness her cubs made soft chirping sounds, and Ted realized with stunning clarity why she'd brought him here. Eleanor had saved a bear cub on the day she died. The same day, 61 years ago, October 15th. This bear, or her ancestor, had been protecting Eleanor's final resting place all these years, waiting for someone who would understand the magnitude of what had been lost here. She loved me, Ted whispered to the bear, his voice broken by grief and wonder. All these years, I thought she'd chosen someone else, but she loved me. She died loving me. The bear's dark eyes reflected the last rays of sunlight filtering through the trees. In them, Ted saw something that might have been understanding, even compassion, as if this magnificent creature knew exactly what it felt like to love someone so much you'd risk everything to save them. But even through his overwhelming grief, Ted's mind was working. Eleanor's letters had been mailed. Someone had intercepted them, lied to her about his response, lied to him about her marriage. Someone who had access to his mail, someone he'd trusted completely. Someone who had spent 61 years watching Ted live with a broken heart, never saying a word. Bobby Mitchell. The 4-hour drive to Portland felt like a journey through hell itself. Ted's ancient pickup truck wheezed and rattled along Highway 26, but his hands gripped the steering wheel with the intensity of a man possessed. Eleanor's letters lay in the passenger seat, each one a testament to a love that had been murdered by betrayal. Sunset Manor. Nursing home squatted like a beige brick monument to forgotten dreams on the outskirts of the city. Ted had visited Bobby here exactly twice in the past 3 years, obligatory visits that left him feeling hollow and depressed. Tonight he came with purpose burning in his chest like acid. The receptionist, a tired-looking woman in her 50s, barely glanced up from her computer screen. "Visiting hours end at 8, sir. You've got about 20 minutes. "That'll be plenty," Ted replied, his voice carrying an edge that made her look at him more carefully. Bobby Mitchell sat in his wheelchair by the window of the common room, oxygen cannula draped across his gaunt face, staring out at a parking lot that might as well have been the surface of the moon for all the life it contained. At 79, Bobby looked older than Ted despite being a year younger. Cancer and guilt, Ted now realized, were merciless companions. "Hey there, Bobby," Ted said quietly, settling into the chair beside his oldest friend, his oldest enemy. Bobby turned slowly, his rheumy eyes taking a moment to focus. When recognition dawned, something that might have been relief flickered across his features. "Ted, didn't expect to see you again so soon. Last time was, what, Christmas?" "February," Ted corrected, pulling the first letter from his jacket pocket. "Found something interesting today, Bobby. Thought you might want to take a look." Bobby's gaze fell on the envelope, and Ted watched the color drain from his already pale face. For a long moment, neither man spoke. The only sounds were the soft hiss of Bobby's oxygen tank and the distant murmur of a television somewhere down the hall. "Where did you find that?" Bobby's voice was barely a whisper. "In the wreckage of Harold Hayes's Cessna, about 20 miles east of Pine Valley. Funny thing, there were 46 more just like it." Ted's voice remained conversational, but his eyes burned with 6 decades of accumulated pain. "All addressed to me, all dated 1963, all from Eleanor." Bobby closed his eyes as if trying to shut out a nightmare. "Ted, she didn't run off with her daddy's business partner, did she, Bobby?" Ted opened the first letter and began to read aloud. "My dearest Ted, I don't know if you're getting these letters. I've sent 12 now and haven't heard back from any of them." "Stop." Bobby's voice cracked like old leather. "Bobby says the mail service to Korea is unreliable, that lots of letters never make it through." Ted continued reading, his voice growing stronger with each word. "He also said something that's been eating at my heart like acid, that you married a girl from your unit. Please, Ted, stop. She loved me, Bobby. She loved me so much she volunteered to go to Vietnam to find me, and you let her die thinking I'd forgotten her." Bobby's hands trembled as he reached for the letter. Ted pulled it back, not ready to relinquish the evidence of his friend's betrayal. "Tell me why," Ted demanded. 61 years, Bobby. 61 years I've carried the pain of thinking she chose someone else. Why?" The silence stretched between them like a chasm. When Bobby finally spoke, his voice was so quiet, Ted had to lean forward to hear him. "I loved her first." The words hung in the air like smoke from a gun barrel. Ted felt his blood pressure spike, the familiar tightness in his chest that warned of cardiac trouble. But he needed to hear this. He needed to understand how someone he'd trusted like a brother could destroy 2 lives with such calculated cruelty. "I loved her from the first day of freshman year," Bobby continued, staring at his hands. "Remember, she walked into Mr. Henderson's chemistry class wearing that yellow dress, and every boy in school forgot how to breathe. But I was the one who helped her with her equations. I was the one who walked her home when it rained. I was the one who listened when she talked about her dreams of becoming a nurse." "So you thought that gave you the right?" "No!" Bobby's outburst triggered a coughing fit that left him gasping. When he could speak again, his voice was raw. I thought I had a chance. 2 whole years, Ted. I was there for her, supporting her, caring about her. And then you showed up senior year with your James Dean haircut and your motorcycle, and suddenly I was invisible." Ted remembered. He'd been working after school at Johnson's garage to help support his mother after his father died. Eleanor had brought her father's Buick in for an oil change, and Ted had spent an hour showing her how to check the fluid levels herself. She'd laughed at his jokes, asked him to the sock hop that Friday, and that had been the beginning of everything. "She chose me, Bobby. That wasn't my fault." "Wasn't it?" Bobby's eyes flashed with an anger that seemed to pull him back from the edge of death. "You waltzed in and charmed her without even trying. Do you know how that felt? Watching the girl you'd worshipped for 2 years fall for someone who barely knew she existed until that moment? So when I shipped out, you saw your chance." Bobby nodded slowly. "I thought, if she believed you'd moved on, maybe she'd finally see me. Really see me." "I asked her to marry me, Ted, right after graduation. Got down on one knee in her father's parlor with my grandmother's ring. And she laughed." The words came out broken, hollow. Not cruel, not mean, just amused. Said she'd rather be an old maid than settle for someone she loved like a brother. That's when I knew I'd never have her. But I also knew I could make sure you didn't either. The magnitude of Bobby's betrayal was staggering. Ted felt like he was drowning in the implications. Every letter. You intercepted every single one. I had a job at the post office that summer, remember? Temporary position while old Pete Hoffman recovered from his surgery. Eleanor's letters came through almost daily. It was easy enough to redirect them. And you told her I'd married someone else? A Red Cross nurse named Kim Sullivan. I made her up completely. Even forged a letter from you saying you were happy and didn't want to hear from home anymore. Bobby's confession poured out like poison from a wound. Eleanor cried for 3 days straight when she got that letter. Her mother called me, asked if I'd talk to her, try to cheer her up. Jesus Christ, Bobby. She died thinking I'd abandoned her. I know. The words were barely audible. I've known for 61 years. Every day since October 15th, 1963. Ted's head snapped up. You know the exact date? Bobby's smile was ghostly, haunted. Harold Hayes hired a private investigator to find the crash site in 1964. Cost him a fortune, but he needed to know what happened to his daughter. The investigator found me eventually, started asking questions about Eleanor's correspondence. I thought I was going to jail. Why didn't you? Because Harold Hayes was a practical man. His daughter was dead, and prosecuting me wouldn't bring her back. But he made me a deal. Bobby reached into the drawer of the table beside his wheelchair and pulled out a worn leather journal. I had to write down everything. Every letter I stole, every lie I told, every detail of what I'd done. And I had to visit her grave. Her grave? Every October 15th for 61 years. Harold had her body recovered from the crash site and buried in Pine Valley Cemetery. Plot 47, under the oak tree where you and she used to sit. I've been leaving flowers there every year, Ted. Yellow roses, her favorite. The revelation hit Ted like a physical blow. He'd driven past Pine Valley Cemetery countless times, never knowing Eleanor lay buried just yards from the road, never knowing his oldest friend had been playing the role of chief mourner at the grave of the woman he'd helped destroy. You sick son of a bitch. Ted's voice was deadly quiet. You killed her just as sure as if you'd put a gun to her head? I know. Bobby's tears came freely now, 61 years of suppressed guilt finally breaking free. I've lived in hell every day since. Never married, never had children, never let myself be happy for even a moment. I destroyed the best thing in your life, and I destroyed myself in the process. Ted stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the linoleum floor. Several other residents looked up from their evening activities, sensing drama unfolding. I should kill you right here, Ted said, and meant it. I should wrap these letters around your scrawny neck and choke the life out of you. I wish you would. Bobby's voice carried a desperate sincerity. I've been dying slowly for 61 years, Ted. Cancer's just finishing what guilt started. The fight went out of Ted as suddenly as it had come. Looking at Bobby, truly looking at him, he saw a man who had already been destroyed by his own actions. The vigorous, laughing boy who'd been his best friend through childhood had been replaced by a hollow shell consumed by regret. How long do you have? Ted asked quietly. 6 weeks, maybe 8. The pain medication helps, but... Bobby shrugged, a gesture that encompassed a lifetime of consequences. Ted sank back into his chair, suddenly feeling every one of his 80 years. She was coming to find me, Bobby. She volunteered for Vietnam because she thought if she could just see me face to face, she could win me back from a woman who didn't even exist. I know. I've read that journal 1,000 times. Harold Hayes made me keep copies of every letter she sent. He wanted me to understand exactly what my jealousy had cost. And the bear? Bobby looked confused. What bear? Ted told him about the rescue, about being led to the crash site, about the 47 letters that had survived 6 decades in the Oregon wilderness. As he spoke, Bobby's face went through a range of emotions: surprise, wonder, and something that might have been hope. She saved a bear cub the day she died, Bobby whispered when Ted finished. It's in her final letter. She made the pilot stop so she could free it from a trap. And today, 61 years later, that cub's descendant led me to the truth. They sat in silence as the implications settled between them. Outside, the Portland streetlights were beginning to flicker on, casting long shadows across the nursing home parking lot. What are you going to do? Bobby asked finally. Ted stood slowly, tucking Eleanor's letters back into his jacket. I'm going to visit her grave. Then I'm going to figure out how to live with the truth. Ted? Bobby's voice stopped him at the doorway. For what it's worth, I'm sorry. I'm so goddamn sorry. Ted turned back one last time. Sorry doesn't bring back 61 years, Bobby. Sorry doesn't give us the life we should have had. As he walked out into the October night, Ted carried the weight of a love story that had been murdered by jealousy and resurrected by the gratitude of a wild animal who remembered kindness across generations. The truth was finally out. Now he had to figure out what to do with it. 3 weeks after the confrontation with Bobby, Ted received the phone call he'd been dreading since childhood. The nursing home's social worker spoke in the practiced, gentle tones reserved for delivering news that would break hearts. Mr. Campbell, I'm calling about Robert Mitchell. He passed away peacefully in his sleep last night. We found a note addressed to you along with some legal documents. Could you come in when it's convenient? Ted set the phone down with hands that trembled more from emotion than age. Bobby was gone, taking with him the last living link to the lies that had shaped 6 decades of Ted's life. Part of him felt relief. The confrontation between them had been inevitable and terrible, like watching a building burn down that should have been demolished years ago. But another part, the part that remembered a freckled 10-year-old boy teaching him to skip stones at Miller's Pond, felt an unexpected stab of grief. The drive back to Portland felt different this time. October had deepened into November, and the Oregon landscape had traded its brilliant autumn colors for the muted grays and browns of approaching winter. Ted found himself thinking about cycles, seasons changing, lives ending, secrets finally coming to light after being buried for generations. At Sunset Manor, the social worker handed him a manila envelope sealed with wax, old-fashioned style. Bobby's final communication felt heavy in Ted's hands, weighted with more than paper and ink. There's also this, she added, producing a thick legal folder. Mr. Mitchell's attorney will need to speak with you. Apparently, you're the sole beneficiary of his estate. Ted nearly dropped the envelope. That can't be right. We hadn't spoken in years. According to the will, he's been updating it regularly. The most recent version was signed just last week. She paused, studying Ted's shocked expression. It's quite substantial, just over $2 million, plus property and investments. The number hit Ted like a physical blow. Bobby had lived like a pauper in that nursing home, wearing the same 3 shirts in rotation, complaining about the cost of cable television. Meanwhile, he'd been sitting on a fortune that could have bought him a mansion anywhere in the country. That evening, in the silence of his cabin, Ted opened Bobby's final letter with the careful reverence of someone disarming a bomb. The handwriting was shakier than it had been even 3 weeks ago, but the words were clear enough. Ted, if you're reading this, then my cowardice has finally been put to rest along with my body. Funny thing about dying. It clarifies what really matters and what was just pride and stupidity. The money comes with conditions, and knowing you, You'll probably want to tell my lawyer to go to hell. But hear me out first. This isn't charity, and it sure as hell isn't an attempt to buy forgiveness. This is restitution, a pathetic, inadequate attempt to pay a debt that can never be fully settled. Eleanor was going to use her trust fund to open a medical clinic for underprivileged children in Vietnam. Did you know that? Her final letters mention it, letters I read every day for 61 years until I memorized every word. She wanted to heal the children caught in a war they didn't start or understand. The money is for that clinic, Ted. Use it to build what she dreamed of building. Make something good come out of all this waste and suffering. Call it the Eleanor Hayes Memorial Clinic if you want. God knows her name deserves to be honored somewhere in this world. There's something else. Harold Hayes wasn't the only one who hired investigators over the years. I've been tracking down every person Eleanor ever helped, every life she touched in her 22 years. She tutored 17 children who went on to become doctors, teachers, and nurses. She volunteered at the county hospital every weekend. She paid for old Mrs. Patterson's surgery when the woman couldn't afford it. Eleanor wasn't just the girl you loved, Ted. She was the girl who saved everyone she could reach. That bear cub she died saving? It wasn't an accident or a moment of impulsiveness. That was just Eleanor being Eleanor, unable to walk past suffering without trying to heal it. I robbed the world of 60 years of Eleanor's goodness. I robbed you of a lifetime with the woman who would have made you happier than any man deserves to be. I robbed her of the chance to save thousands of children who never got to benefit from her healing hands. The least I can do is try to resurrect her dream. Don't forgive me, Ted. I don't deserve it, and I'm not asking for it. But don't let her vision die with all of us. Build something beautiful in her memory. Let her save children the way she always wanted to. The property I'm leaving you includes the old Hayes estate on Maple Street. Harold left it to me when he died in 1987, another condition of our arrangement. He said someday the truth would come out, and when it did, you'd need somewhere to remember her properly. Her belongings are still there, Ted. Her room, her books, her jewelry box with the ring she mentioned in her final letter. Harold kept everything exactly as she left it, and so did I. It's been a shrine to my guilt for 37 years. Maybe it can become something better in your hands. I hope you find peace, old friend. You deserved so much better than the life my jealousy forced you to live. Bobby P.S. The Bear family that led you to the crash site. I've been leaving food for them every October 15th for 20 years. They know the way to Eleanor's grave, too. Ask Dr. Sarah Martinez at the Wildlife Center. She can explain their behavioral patterns better than I can, but they've been protecting her memory longer than any of us realized. Ted read the letter 3 times before its full implications sank in. Bobby hadn't just stolen Eleanor's letters. He'd stolen her future, her dreams, her chance to heal the world one child at a time. But in his twisted way, he'd also preserved pieces of her that Ted never would have found otherwise. The next morning brought the heart attack Ted had been expecting since the day he'd confronted the python in the forest. It hit him while he was shaving, a crushing pain that sent him to his knees on the bathroom floor. For a moment, as consciousness wavered, he saw Eleanor's face as clearly as if she were standing beside him. "Not yet," he whispered to her image. "I've got work to do." The paramedics found him an hour later when his neighbor came to check on him. 3 days in the cardiac unit at Portland General gave Ted plenty of time to think about Bobby's final gift and the weight of expectation it carried. His son Jimmy flew in from Seattle, looking older than his 55 years, and carrying the worn expression of a man who'd been expecting this call for a decade. They'd never been close. Ted's emotional distance after Martha's death had driven a wedge between them that neither man knew how to bridge. "Dad, you can't keep living alone in that cabin," Jimmy said, settling into the uncomfortable hospital chair. "This heart attack was a warning. Next time, you might not be so lucky." "I've got things to do, son. Important things." "More important than staying alive?" Ted looked at his boy, because at 80, Jimmy would always be his boy, and realized that the sins of one generation didn't have to poison the next. He told Jimmy everything. About Eleanor, about Bobby's betrayal, about the Bear family that had led him to the truth. About the money and the responsibility it carried. When he finished, Jimmy sat in stunned silence for a long time. Finally, he spoke. "You mean I've had a stepmother I never knew about my entire life?" "In every way that mattered, yes." "And you're going to use this inheritance to build a medical clinic?" "In Vietnam. For children. The way she wanted." Jimmy smiled for the first time since arriving in Portland. "Mom would have loved this, you know. She always said you had more love in you than you knew what to do with. Your mother was a saint for putting up with a broken-down old fool like me." "No, Dad. She was just a woman who understood that some hearts take longer to heal than others. But they do heal, if you let them." That night, alone in his hospital room, Ted made a decision that would have seemed impossible just weeks before. He was going to live. Not just survive, but truly live for the first time since 1963. He had Eleanor's dreams to resurrect, a son to reconnect with, and a family of bears who somehow understood that some promises transcend species and time. The heart attack hadn't been the end of his story. It had been the beginning of Eleanor's. The Hayes estate on Maple Street stood like a monument to interrupted dreams, its Victorian architecture weathered but intact after decades of careful maintenance. Bobby had kept his word. The house looked exactly as it might have in 1963, frozen in time like a museum exhibit dedicated to a life cut tragically short. Ted stood on the wraparound porch, Jimmy beside him, holding the ornate brass key that Bobby's lawyer had pressed into his hands along with the deed. The November wind carried the scent of rain and dying leaves, and somewhere in the distance a dog barked with the lonely persistence of a creature calling to something that would never answer. "You sure you want to do this, Dad?" Jimmy asked quietly. His presence had been a surprise gift. After learning about Eleanor, Jimmy had taken a leave of absence from his job in Seattle to help his father navigate this strange inheritance of love and loss. "I've been avoiding ghosts for 61 years, son. Time I made peace with them." The front door opened with the whispered protest of hinges that hadn't moved in months. Inside, dust motes danced in shafts of pale sunlight that filtered through lace curtains Eleanor's mother had probably hung before the war. The furniture was draped in white sheets like sleeping spirits, and the air held the peculiar stillness of a house where time had stopped moving forward. Harold Hayes had been a methodical man, apparently. Every room showed evidence of careful preservation. Photographs still hung in their original positions, books remained arranged on shelves according to some long-forgotten system, and Eleanor's presence lingered in details that broke Ted's heart with their intimacy. A half-finished needlepoint project lay on the sitting room table. A coffee cup sat beside her father's reading chair, as if Harold had been unable to bear clearing away even the smallest reminders of his daughter's last morning in this house. But it was Eleanor's bedroom that nearly brought Ted to his knees. Nothing had been touched. The bed was still made with the yellow coverlet she'd chosen for her 16th birthday. Her books, medical texts mixed with romance novels and poetry collections, lined the shelves in neat rows. A formal gown hung in the open closet, the one she'd worn to their senior prom, pressed and ready as if she might return any moment to wear it again. On the vanity table, arranged with the precision of religious artifacts, lay the remnants of a young woman's daily rituals. A silver hairbrush still held strands of corn silk hair. Lipstick tubes stood in a neat row, colors chosen by a girl who'd thought she had decades ahead to experiment with different shades of beauty. And there, in the center of it all, sat a small wooden jewelry box with intricate floral carvings. Ted's hands shook as he lifted the lid. The melody that played, Für Elise, Eleanor's favorite, seemed to echo from another lifetime, another universe where young love had been allowed to flourish instead of being murdered by jealousy and lies. Inside, nestled in faded blue velvet, lay the ring Eleanor had mentioned in her final letter. It was perfect in its simplicity, a slim gold band with a small diamond that caught the afternoon light and threw tiny rainbows across the bedroom walls. Ted lifted it with reverent fingers, reading the inscription that had been hidden from him for over 6 decades. TC plus EH, until the stars burn out. She bought this for you? Jimmy's voice was soft with wonder. With her own money, probably saved for months working at her father's bank. Ted's throat felt raw, scraped clean by emotions he'd buried so deep he'd forgotten they existed. She was going to propose to me, Jimmy. When I got back from Korea, she was going to ask me to marry her. The weight of that revelation settled between them like something alive and breathing. In 1963, women didn't propose to men. The very idea would have been scandalous in a town like Pine Valley, where tradition ruled social interactions with iron authority. For Eleanor to have planned such a bold gesture spoke to a love so fierce it transcended social conventions. "Dad, look at this." Jimmy was standing beside Eleanor's writing desk, holding a leather-bound journal. It's dated right up until the day she left for Vietnam. Ted accepted the journal as if it were made of spun glass. Eleanor's handwriting filled page after page. Thoughts, dreams, plans for their future together, and increasingly desperate attempts to understand why the boy she loved had fallen silent. September 15th, 1963. Still no word from Ted. Bobby insists the mail service is unreliable, but Mrs. Patterson says letters to other families are getting through just fine. I'm starting to wonder if something terrible has happened. What if he's been wounded? What if he's lying in some army hospital, unable to write? I've made a decision. I'm going to Vietnam, not just to find Ted, but to serve my country the way he's serving his. If he really has forgotten me, at least I'll be doing something meaningful with my heartbreak. October 1st, 1963. Daddy finally agreed to fly me to San Francisco. I think he's realized that his stubborn daughter inherited her determination from him. The ring is ready. Bought it from Whitman's jewelry with money I saved from working at the bank. Mr. Whitman thought I was crazy when I told him what inscription I wanted, but he did it anyway. If Ted still loves me, I'm going to ask him to marry me the moment I find him. If he doesn't, well, at least I'll know I fought for us until the very end. October 14th, 1963. Last night in this house. I keep thinking about all the plans Ted and I made sitting on the porch swing. We were going to live in the little house on Elm Street, the one with the white picket fence and the apple tree in the backyard. We were going to have 3 children, 2 boys and a girl, and grow old together watching them play in that same yard. Maybe those dreams are foolish now. Maybe Ted really has moved on. But I have to try. I have to know for certain. Some loves are worth fighting for, even if the fight breaks your heart. Ted closed the journal, unable to read more. The girl who had written those words, so full of hope and determination and boundless love, had died the next day believing he'd abandoned her. The injustice of it burned in his chest like acid. "There's something else," Jimmy said gently, pointing to a manila envelope propped against Eleanor's jewelry box. "It's addressed to you." The envelope bore Harold Hayes's distinctive handwriting, "For Theodore Campbell, to be opened only when the truth is known." Inside, Ted found a letter dated December 15, 1987, and a small black-and-white photograph. Theodore, if you're reading this, then Bobby Mitchell has finally found the courage to tell you what he did to my daughter. I've waited 24 years for this moment, hoping that someday justice would prevail over cowardice. I knew within 6 months of Eleanor's death that someone had intercepted her letters. My daughter was many things: impulsive, stubborn, romantic to a fault, but she was not a liar. When she told me she'd written to you every day for 3 months and received no reply, I believed her. I hired investigators, followed paper trails, asked uncomfortable questions. Eventually, the truth led me to young Bobby Mitchell and his summer job at the post office. The evidence was circumstantial but convincing. More importantly, his reaction when confronted told me everything I needed to know. I could have had him prosecuted. I could have destroyed his life the way he destroyed my daughter's. Instead, I chose a different form of justice. I made him carry the weight of his actions for the rest of his life. I made him remember Eleanor's goodness every single day through mandatory visits to her grave and detailed written confessions of his crimes. Perhaps that was cruel. Perhaps I should have simply had him arrested and been done with it. But I wanted him to understand the magnitude of what he'd stolen from the world. Eleanor wasn't just your lost love, Theodore. She was meant to heal people. She was meant to save lives. His jealousy robbed countless children of the medical care she would have provided. The photograph I've enclosed was taken 3 days before she left for Vietnam. She's wearing the ring she bought for you, practicing her proposal in the mirror. She wanted everything to be perfect when she found you. I know my daughter loved you completely, Theodore. I also know that love like that doesn't die, even when the lovers do. Find a way to honor what you shared. Find a way to let her dreams live on through your hands. She would have made you gloriously happy, son. I hope someday you can make peace with the life you should have lived together. Harold Hayes. The photograph showed Eleanor standing before her bedroom mirror, radiant in her simple white dress, holding up her left hand to admire the engagement ring that caught the camera's flash like a tiny star. Her smile was luminous with anticipation and joy, the expression of a woman about to embark on the greatest adventure of her life. Looking at that image, Ted finally understood the true scope of what Bobby's betrayal had cost. This wasn't just about 2 young people who'd been kept apart by lies. This was about decades of service Eleanor would have given to the world, children she would have saved, lives she would have touched with her healing hands. She'd died believing love had failed her, never knowing that love was exactly what had driven her toward that fatal flight. "Dad?" Jimmy's voice seemed to come from very far away. "Are you all right?" Ted wiped his eyes with the back of his hand, surprised to find tears there. "No, son. I'm not all right. But for the first time in 61 years, I think I might be someday." Outside, the November wind rattled the windows of the house where Eleanor Hayes had dreamed of a future that would never come. But inside that preserved bedroom, surrounded by the artifacts of interrupted love, Ted Campbell began to understand that some promises could be kept, even when the people who made them were no longer alive to honor them. Eleanor's medical clinic would be built. Her dreams would live again through the children it would save. And somewhere in the Oregon wilderness, a family of bears would continue to remember the kindness of a young woman who died trying to love someone who never stopped loving her back. The stars hadn't burned out yet. There was still time to make good on old promises, still time to let love win in the end. Spring arrived early in Oregon that year, as if the earth itself was eager to begin healing after a winter of revelations and grief. Ted stood at Eleanor's grave in Pine Valley Cemetery, the yellow roses he'd brought trembling slightly in his weathered hands. Plot 47, just as Bobby had said, beneath the spreading oak where he and Eleanor had carved their initials so many decades ago. The headstone was simple granite, bearing only her name, dates, and the inscription Harold Hayes had chosen. She loved completely. Below that, someone had added a smaller plaque in recent years. Beloved by the bears she saved. "I brought you something," Ted whispered to the marker, kneeling carefully on the soft grass that had grown over her resting place. From his jacket pocket he withdrew the engagement ring, its small diamond catching the morning sunlight just as it had in that photograph from 1963. "I know you bought this for me, sweetheart, but I think it belongs here with you. At least until I can figure out how to keep the promise it was meant to seal." As he placed the ring gently against the base of the headstone, Ted heard the familiar sound of heavy footsteps in the fallen leaves behind him. He didn't need to turn around to know that Mama Bear had found him again, just as she had every time he'd visited the crash site over the past 6 months. She approached with her characteristic dignity, her 2 yearling cubs following at a respectful distance. The family had grown comfortable with Ted's presence, accepting him as something between a curiosity and a friend. Dr. Sarah Martinez had explained that bears possessed remarkable memory and could recognize individual humans across many years. This family, she theorized, had been conditioned across generations to associate certain humans with safety and kindness. "Hello, girl," Ted said softly as the massive bear settled beside him with surprising grace. "Come to pay your respects, too?" The bear's dark eyes studied the headstone as if she could read the words carved there. Then, in a gesture that never failed to move Ted, she gently touched her nose to the yellow roses he'd placed there, inhaling their scent with what seemed like reverence. The cubs, now nearly full-grown but still playful, wrestled quietly among the oak's roots while their mother maintained her vigil. Ted had learned to interpret their behavior over the months of these encounters. They weren't just visiting randomly, they came on specific days, as if following some internal calendar that marked important anniversaries. "Your great-great-grandmother probably knew Eleanor," Ted murmured, scratching behind the bear's ear with the familiarity born of repeated encounters. "Funny how that works, isn't it? Your family remembering kindness longer than most humans remember betrayal." His phone buzzed with a text from Jimmy, who had become his constant companion and partner in the elaborate project they'd undertaken together. The Eleanor Hayes Memorial Medical Center was taking shape in Ho Chi Minh City, built with Bobby's inheritance and staffed by Vietnamese doctors who specialized in pediatric care. The groundbreaking ceremony was scheduled for October 15th, the 60th anniversary of Eleanor's death. But that wasn't the only project consuming Ted's time and energy. The old Hayes estate had been transformed into a wildlife rehabilitation center, specializing in orphaned bear cubs and other forest animals. Dr. Martinez had enthusiastically joined the effort, bringing her expertise and a team of volunteers who shared Eleanor's apparent gift for connecting with wounded creatures. "She would have loved this place," Jimmy had said during one of their planning sessions. "Mom always said you had a healer's heart, Dad. You just never let yourself use it." The irony wasn't lost on Ted. At 81, he was finally becoming the man Eleanor had seen in him all those years ago. Someone who could channel grief into service, transform loss into love. The heart attack that had nearly killed him had instead cracked open something that had been sealed shut since 1963. Mama Bear shifted beside him, a low rumble in her throat that might have been contentment. The morning sun had climbed high enough to warm the cemetery, and the oak's new leaves cast dancing shadows across Eleanor's grave. For the first time since discovering those letters in the crashed plane, Ted felt something approaching peace. "I've got news, sweetheart," he said to the headstone, his voice stronger now than it had been in months. "The clinic's almost ready. Dr. Nguyen says they'll be able to treat over 1,000 children in the first year alone. Kids with cleft palates, heart defects, things that would have been death sentences without proper medical care. He paused, watching the cubs play in the dappled sunlight. And Jimmy's engaged. Girl named Sarah. She's a teacher, just like Martha was. They're planning a fall wedding, and they want to have it here in Pine Valley, at the little church where you and I were supposed to get married. The admission surprised him with its lack of pain. For 60 years, he'd avoided that church, crossed streets to keep from walking past its white-painted steeple. Now the thought of his son finding happiness there felt like a gift, rather than a reminder of what he'd lost. Mama Bear rose, suddenly, her attention focused on something beyond the cemetery's iron gates. Ted followed her gaze and saw a small figure approaching, a girl of perhaps 7 or 8, walking carefully among the headstones with the serious demeanor of someone on an important mission. "That's Emma Chen," Ted recognized her from his visits to Dr. Martinez at the Wildlife Center. "Sarah's niece. What's she doing here?" The little girl approached them fearlessly, though she maintained a respectful distance from the bears. In her hands, she carried a small bouquet of wildflowers and a folded piece of paper. "Mr. Campbell, my Aunt Sarah told me about the lady who saved the bears. I wanted to bring her flowers and say thank you." Ted's throat tightened unexpectedly. "That's very kind of you, Emma. I think she would have liked that very much." Emma placed her wildflowers beside Ted's roses, then carefully unfolded her paper. "I wrote her a letter. Aunt Sarah says sometimes it helps to write to people even when they can't write back. Would you like to read it out loud?" The little girl nodded solemnly and began to read in her clear, young voice. "Dear Bear Lady, thank you for saving the animals, even when it was dangerous. Aunt Sarah says you were very brave and very kind. I want to be an animal doctor like her when I grow up so I can help bears too. I hope you're happy in heaven, and I hope the bears remember you forever and ever. Love, Emma." As the child's words hung in the spring air, something extraordinary happened. Mama Bear moved closer to Emma, lowering her massive head until the girl could reach out and gently touch her fur. There was no fear on either side, only a recognition of shared purpose that transcended species. "She likes you," Ted said softly. "I like her too. Aunt Sarah says she's the smartest bear in Oregon. Your aunt is probably right about that." They stood together in comfortable silence. An old man, a young girl, and a family of bears paying homage to a woman whose legacy of kindness had rippled across generations. The moment felt sacred, touched by something larger than any of them could fully understand. As Emma prepared to leave, she turned back to Ted with the directness that only children possess. "Mr. Campbell, are you sad about the bear lady?" Ted considered the question carefully. 6 months ago, he would have said yes without hesitation. But standing here in the warming sunlight, surrounded by new life and old love, he found a different answer. "I'm sad that she died so young, Emma. But I'm not sad that she lived. She made the world better in her 22 years than most people do in 80. That's something to celebrate, not mourn." The little girl nodded as if this made perfect sense, then skipped away through the headstones, her mission complete. Mama Bear remained beside Ted for another hour, keeping him company as he told Eleanor about the clinic, about Jimmy's engagement, about the small miracles that had grown from the seeds of her interrupted dreams. When she finally rose to rejoin her cubs, she paused to touch her nose once more to the flowers at the grave's base. "Thank you," Ted whispered, as the bear family disappeared into the forest that bordered the cemetery. "For everything." As he walked back to his truck, Ted carried Eleanor's ring in his pocket, not as a symbol of loss anymore, but as a promise kept and a love that had finally found its way home. Sometimes the greatest love stories aren't about perfect endings. They're about love that survives betrayal, transcends death, and finds new ways to heal the world. Ted Campbell's journey reminds us that it's never too late to honor the dreams we thought were lost forever. At 81, he discovered that his first love, Eleanor, hadn't abandoned him but died trying to reach him, her letters stolen by jealousy and lies. Yet from this devastating truth came something beautiful. Eleanor's dream of healing children became reality through the medical clinic Ted built in her memory, and her kindness to a trapped bear cub 60 years ago led a grateful bear family to reveal the truth that set him free. For those of us in our golden years, Ted's story speaks to the power of second chances and the healing that comes from transforming pain into purpose. We've all carried secrets, regrets, and what-ifs that have shaped our lives. But like Ted, we can choose to let love, not bitterness, define our legacy. Sometimes the most profound healing happens when we stop nursing old wounds and start honoring old dreams. What childhood promise or dream have you left unfulfilled that could still bring healing to others? Have you ever discovered that a painful memory was based on incomplete information, and how did that change your perspective? Share your thoughts below, and let's remind each other that love truly never dies, it just waits for the right moment to bloom again.